There is this idea that to take cinematic photos you need the perfect lens, the perfect light or some moody location. But the more I shoot, especially on the street in real places with real light, the more I realize that cinematic isn't about perfection. It's not a checklist of bokeh, soft tones or wide apertures. Cinematic is a mindset. It's the way you see the world, the way you feel when you're holding the camera. You don't need to travel across the world or wait for golden hour. You can take cinematic photos anywhere if you are present enough to notice the emotion around you. For the longest time I chased the cinematic look. You know the one. The shallow depth of field, the creamy backgrounds, the 85mm compression that makes everything feel like it is a still from a movie. I was convinced that if I get the right gear I would unlock some kind of magic. But over time that obsession started to fade. Because I began to notice something else. The photos that actually moved me didn't follow the superficial cinematic formula we get to see on social media. Some were shot at 23mm or 35mm. Some were taken in bad light with no obvious subject. And yet they felt alive, they had story, they had depth, they pulled you in. That's when it hit me. Cinematic isn't about how a photo looks. At least not entirely. To me, a cinematic photo belongs in a film because it has something more to say. It makes a promise of something that it is to come. But cinema isn't just one thing. It's a vast language with countless styles. So now when I think of a cinematic photo, I think of an image that makes you want to hit the play button and watch the entire scene unfold. One of the biggest misconceptions is that depth only comes when shooting wide open. Shallow depth of field has its place, it's beautiful, it isolates, it's a tool, but it's not the only way to create depth. In fact, some of the most layered dimensional images I've ever taken had very little blur. What made them feel three-dimensional was the light. Light has direction, it has texture, and depending on the angle it hits your subject, it can tell a completely different story. Backlight, for example, gives you that dreamy, almost nostalgic feel, especially if there is a little haze or reflection. It can feel cinematic in a very classic sense, like something that is coming out of an old film reel. Sidelight, on the other hand, adds contrast. It sculpts the subject by adding shadows. It reveals textures and amplifies the messages that come from the eyes. It creates a sense of space and presence. Even harsh top-down light that we usually avoid can work in our favor. It's raw, it's gritty, and sometimes, especially in street photography, that's exactly what you need. It adds drama to our characters and a sense of urgency for something that is about to happen. So if you're thinking this light is too harsh or it is not ideal, pause and ask, what emotion does this light give me? Because cinematic doesn't always mean soft and moody. Sometimes it means real. If you're enjoying the video so far, hit the like button and consider subscribing with a bell because more stories like this one are coming soon. Now let's have a look how storytelling through composition can make a photo feel truly cinematic. You don't always need a person in the frame to tell a story. That was a big shift in my mindset. For a long time I thought cinematic photos had to have a character. Someone walking, someone looking off to the distance, and someone doing something interesting. And yes, people are powerful storytellers, but sometimes it's the small quiet details that speak the loudest. An empty chair under a soft or a harsh light. A forgotten piece of fabric hanging from an old wire. The shadow of someone walking just out of the frame. These little fragments of life, they leave space for imagination. They suggest a narrative without spelling it out. And that's something I've come to love in cinematic street photography. The ability to imply a story, not just document it. Composition plays a huge role in that. I've come to realize that capturing a balanced frame, following all the rules, shouldn't be my starting point. I make sure I start by asking this question. What am I trying to say? Once I have the answer, I use lines, light, shapes, colors, negative space to direct this feeling. As we said before, layering is a big part of this too. Shooting through windows, reflections, or even other people walking in front of your subject all of that adds complexity. It makes the viewer stop and want to explore more. That's cinematic in its truest sense. Not just a snapshot, but a scene. And you don't need anything fancy to do this. Just a willingness to slow down, observe, and treat every corner of the street like it has something worth noticing. One of the most powerful tools in cinematic photography is color. Not just how it looks, but how it feels. The way we grade our photos, the tones we lean into, the subtle shifts in warmth and coolness. All of that carries emotional weight. It's not about looking trendy or filmic. It's about creating an atmosphere that supports the story you're trying to tell. Dark and moody edits, for example, can make an image feel introspective or even lonely. Shadows stretch longer, blacks are deeper, and colors fade just enough to let the silence in. On the other hand, colder tones like blue and green shifts often feel distant, quiet, or even emotionally restrained. They can give your photos a sense of calm, but also a bit of sadness or mystery. Then there is warmth, golden highlights, soft skin tones, and a bit of orange glow that feels like nostalgia. These tones are intimate. They remind us of sunlight, connection, and fond memories. And what's powerful and probably more appropriate is that you don't need to overdo it. You don't need to slap on a heavy filter or mimic a specific film stock. Sometimes just pulling the warmth of the highlights or cooling the shadows slightly is enough to tilt the emotion of a frame. When I edit now, I ask myself, what do I want this photo to feel like? Not what's the cinematic look that is trendy on social media, but what is the story I want this color to tell? Because ultimately, cinematic photography is less about the style, but more about the emotion. I'm not going to pretend that gear doesn't matter. It does, but probably not in the way that most people think. Yes, fast lenses are beautiful. Shooting at f1.4 or f1.2 gives you options. But cinematic photos aren't guaranteed by gear. They're born from choices. How you feel, what do you see, and how do you translate that through your camera. Some of my favorite images were taken on an APS-C camera with a cheap lens. And looking back, I think this limitation was a gift. It forced me to stop chasing blur and start chasing light, composition, and emotion. It made me more present, more thoughtful, more connected. That's when I started to understand that gear is a lot more than specs. They are tools. And one of the most powerful tools we have in cinematic photography is focal length. Not just for framing, but for storytelling. An 85mm lens gives you that classic cinematic look with shallow depth of field and beautiful compression. But it also creates emotional distance. It places the viewer just far enough away to observe. And sometimes that's the point, to make the subject feel isolated, reflective, or even untouchable. But when you want to bring your viewer closer, to breathe the same air as your subject, the 50mm or even better the 35mm can bring them in. They create intimacy, a sense of humanity. They make you feel like you are there in the moment, not just looking in from the outside. Want to make your subject larger than life? Try a wide or an ultra-wide focal length from a low angle. It can exaggerate perspectives, create tension, or elevate someone into mythic proportions. It's bold, it's expressive, it's a way of saying, look at this person, they matter. And when the goal is to ground your character into their environment and tell a story not just about who they are, but where they are and what they do, that's where the 35mm comes in. It balances presence with context. It invites the viewer to explore the frame, to linger. Photography doesn't always have to be polished. Sometimes it needs to be honest. In the end, your gear is just your translator. It doesn't see for you, it doesn't feel for you, it can only respond to what you notice. So yes, it is important to learn our tools, to understand our focal lengths. But don't wait for perfect gear to start telling real stories. Because cinematic photography doesn't begin with what's in your hands. It begins with what's in your mind. Just like focal length, the angle you choose to shoot says something about where you place the viewer, both emotionally and psychologically. A low angle makes your subject feel dominant, powerful, larger than life. It can elevate an ordinary moment into something iconic, almost heroic. But it can also create distance or tension depending on the subject's expression or the environment. Sometimes it feels like the viewer is a child looking up at the world. A high angle, on the other hand, does the exact opposite. It makes your subjects feel smaller, more vulnerable, or even overwhelmed by their surroundings. It can evoke tenderness, insecurity, or a sense of isolation. When used with intention, it adds emotional weight. It says, look how fragile this moment is. Eye-level shots feel more natural. They're neutral, honest. They invite the viewer into the scene without judgment. It's like sitting across someone at a cafe and hearing their story. There is connection, there is empathy, no power play, just presence. Tilted or Dutch angles can introduce unease, chaos, or imbalance. They break expectations. Things feel a little off, and that's the point. When used subtly, they can reflect an emotional state, a shift in the narrative, or a crack in the facade of what appears to be normal. Even shooting from behind or over the shoulder can tell a different story. It creates curiosity. It places the viewer just outside of the moment, like a quiet observer, almost eavesdropping. It's intimate but distant, and sometimes that tension is where the true words are spoken. Angles aren't just technical choices, they are emotional decisions. They determine what kind of story you are telling and how the viewer is experiencing it. So the next time you raise your camera, ask yourself this: where am I placing the viewer and why? Because sometimes the story changes completely with just a few inches higher or lower. What I've learned is that cinematic photos don't come from chasing a look. They come from chasing a feeling. They happen when you slow down and you really see what's in front of you. Not just light and shapes, but moments, emotion, and atmosphere. That's what makes an image click. That's what gives it a soul. It's easy to get caught up into what cinematic is supposed to mean. Is it the gear, the settings, the aesthetic trends? But to be honest, cinematic is personal. It's how you interpret the world. It's the way a shadow falls on a wall that reminds you something, maybe an old memory. Maybe it's the way someone turns away the exact time the light hits their face. The way a detail hints at something larger than what is visible. Cinematic photography for me has nothing to do with perfection. It's about translating what I felt in a fleeting moment. And when I approach it that way, with intention, presence, and care, anywhere becomes cinematic. So the next time you are out with your camera, don't wait for the right conditions. Don't wait for inspiration to strike. It's already there. In the light, the colors, the quiet details. All you have to do is to notice it. What is cinematic photography for you? Do you even believe in the term cinematic? Let me know in the comments. If you want to dive deeper into composition, click and watch this video next. That was all for the guys. Thank you very much for watching. Until next time, I will see you on the streets. Bye bye.